Hello there, young one. Pull up that chair. Make yourself comfortable. Name's Harold Brennan, though most folks around here just call me Harry. I'm 73 years old this past September. Been retired from the railroad for near on 10 years now. These old bones don't move like they used to, but my mind's still sharp as a tack, and I've got stories to tell that'll curl your toes. You look like you could use a good story, something to take your mind off whatever's troubling you. I can see it in your eyes, that look young folks get when life starts throwing curveballs. Well, settle in, because I'm about to tell you about the biggest curveball life ever threw at me, and it happened when I was about your age. This story? Well, it's not one I tell often. My Martha, God rest her soul, she knew bits and pieces, but never the whole truth. Some stories are like fine wine. They need time to age before you can properly appreciate them. This one's been aging for 45 years. It was 1980, and I was 28 years old, working as a conductor for the Chicago Northwestern Railway. Good job, steady pay, and I was living in a little apartment in Milwaukee, thinking I had the world figured out. That's when I met her. Rebecca Catherine Morrison. God, even saying her name now brings back that flutter in my chest. I met Becca at a diner called Murphy's on State Street. I'd stopped in for my usual coffee and pie after a long haul from Chicago, still in my work clothes, probably looking like I'd been dragged behind the train instead of riding in it. She was working the evening shift, and when she brought me my coffee, she smiled at me like I was the most interesting man she'd ever laid eyes on. Now, I wasn't much to look at back then. Tall and lanky, with hands permanently stained black from railroad grease, and a nose that had been broken twice in bar fights I should have been smart enough to avoid. But Becca, she was something else. Auburn hair that caught the light like spun copper, green eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a laugh that could make you forget your own name. She was 25, 3 years younger than me, and had the kind of beauty that made grown men walk into lampposts. We started dating, and for 6 months I was the happiest man in Wisconsin. She'd wait up for me when I came back from long hauls, have dinner ready, listen to my stories about life on the rails. I was completely smitten. Hell, I was ready to ask her to marry me. I'd even picked out a ring, a modest little diamond from Zales that cost me 3 weeks' wages. But then things started getting strange. It began with little things. Becca would get mysterious phone calls that she'd take in the other room, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about them, she'd say it was her sister from Minneapolis having trouble with her husband. Fair enough, I thought.
Family business can be complicated. Then there were the evenings she couldn't see me. Working double shifts, she'd say, but when I stopped by Murphy's on those nights, other waitresses would tell me she wasn't scheduled. When I confronted her, she'd get tearful and say she was picking up shifts at another restaurant across town, trying to save money for our future together. I wanted to believe her. Love makes fools of us all, and I was the biggest fool in Milwaukee County. The truth started unraveling on a rainy Thursday in October. I was supposed to be on a run to Green Bay, but the train broke down in Fond du Lac, and we all got sent home early. I decided to surprise Becca with dinner at that fancy Italian place she'd been wanting to try. I went to her apartment first, a little place above Mrs. Kowalski's bakery on Brady Street. I had my key, a sign of trust she'd given me just a month before.
I climbed those narrow stairs, already imagining her surprised face, already tasting that tiramisu she'd been talking about. I opened the door and froze. There was Becca, but she wasn't alone. She was in the arms of another man, and they were, well, let's just say They were engaged in activities that made it crystal clear this wasn't a casual friendship. The man was older, maybe 40, wearing an expensive suit, and had the kind of confident posture that comes with money. The sound of the door opening made them spring apart. Becca's face went white as fresh snow, and the man, cool as a cucumber, just straightened his tie and looked at me like I was an unwelcome interruption to his afternoon. "Harry," Becca stammered, grabbing a robe. "I can explain." But I didn't stick around for explanations. I dropped the key on the floor and walked out, my heart feeling like it had been put through a meat grinder. I spent that night at O'Malley's pub, drinking whiskey and feeling sorry for myself, while Jimmy O'Malley himself listened to my tale of woe and kept the drinks coming. Now, most men would have called it quits right there. Hell, most sensible men would have thrown her clothes out the window and never looked back. But like I said, love makes fools of us all, and I wasn't done being a fool just yet. Becca showed up at my apartment the next morning, eyes red from crying, begging me to listen. She spun me a tale about how the man was her ex-husband, a detail she'd conveniently forgotten to mention in our 6 months together, and how he'd been threatening her, saying he'd make trouble for her at work if she didn't. Well, if she didn't give him what he wanted. "I was trying to protect you, Harry," she sobbed. "He said he'd hurt you if he knew about us. I thought if I just gave him what he wanted one more time, he'd leave us alone forever." It was a good story. Hell, it was a great story. It had everything. A damsel in distress, a villainous ex-husband, a noble sacrifice. And like the lovesick fool I was, I believed every word of it. We got back together, and for another month, things seemed perfect. Better than perfect, even. Becca was more attentive, more loving, more everything. She talked about our future, about getting married, about the little house we'd buy with the white picket fence and the vegetable garden. I was so happy I could have floated to the moon. But then I started noticing things again. Little things that didn't quite add up. Like the expensive perfume she was wearing. French stuff that cost more than she made in a week at Murphy's. When I asked about it, she said her sister had sent it as an early Christmas present. But I'd met her sister by then, and she was a school teacher in Minneapolis, not exactly the French perfume type. Or the new clothes that kept appearing in her closet. Silk blouses, designer jeans, shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Sales?" she'd say with a smile. "You know how good I am at finding bargains." The final straw came in December, just 2 weeks before Christmas. I was planning to propose on Christmas Eve, had the whole thing worked out, dinner at the fancy Italian place, then a carriage ride through the old German district, down on one knee in the snow under the streetlights. It was going to be perfect. But first, I wanted to buy her something special for Christmas, and something to match that engagement ring burning a hole in my pocket. I decided on a necklace. Nothing too fancy, but nice enough to show how much she meant to me. I went to Goldman's Jewelry on Wisconsin Avenue, the same place where I'd bought the ring. Mr. Goldman, a sweet old German immigrant who'd been running the shop for 30 years, recognized me immediately. "Ah, Mr. Brennan," he said with his thick accent. "Back for more jewelry for your beautiful girlfriend, yes?" I was confused. "What do you mean, more jewelry?" He looked puzzled. "The gentleman who was here last week, he bought a very expensive bracelet. Diamond tennis bracelet. Very nice. He said it was for Rebecca Morrison, gave me your name as reference. Said you two were engaged, very happy." My blood ran cold. What did this man look like? Mr. Goldman's description matched the man I'd found. in Becca's apartment. Perfectly. Expensive suit, confident bearing, about 40 years old, with salt and pepper hair, and what Mr. Goldman called rich man's hands. I left the jewellery store without buying anything and drove straight to Murphy's. Becca was working the lunch shift, and I waited in my car across the street, watching. Sure enough, at exactly 2 p.m., when her shift ended, a black Cadillac pulled up. The same man from her apartment got out, and Becca ran to him like a schoolgirl, running to her boyfriend. They kissed, not the kiss of a woman being coerced by her threatening ex-husband, but the kiss of a woman in love. Then she got in the car, and they drove away together. I followed them. They went to the Pfister Hotel, Milwaukee's fanciest establishment. I watched from across the street as they walked in together, his hand on the small of her back, her laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. They looked like a couple. They looked like they belonged together. I sat in that car for 3 hours, my heart breaking a little more with each passing minute. When the laugh finally came out, Becca was wearing new clothes, a dress I'd never seen before, and around her neck a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the winter sunlight like stars. That's when I knew the truth. There was no threatening ex-husband. There was no coercion. Becca Morrison, the woman I'd planned to marry, the woman I'd given my heart to completely, was nothing more than a very skilled liar who'd been playing both ends against the middle. But here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. Instead of confronting her, instead of making a scene, I decided to do some detective work. If Becca could lie, so could I. I told her I was being sent on a long haul to Seattle, would be gone for a week. Instead, I took some vacation time and started following them. What I discovered over the next few days was a story more complicated than anything I could have imagined. The man's name was Richard Pemberton III, and he was indeed wealthy. Old Milwaukee money, the kind that came from brewing and real estate. But he wasn't Becca's ex-husband. He wasn't even divorced. He was very much married to a woman named Margaret, and that they had 3 children together. Becca, I learned, wasn't just playing me. She was playing a much bigger game than I'd realized. She was what they used to call a professional companion, a high-class escort who specialized in wealthy married men. The diner job was just a cover, a way to meet regular guys like me, who could provide alibis and cover stories for her real business. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming, least of all me. On the 4th day of my surveillance, I watched Richard's black Cadillac pull up to a small house in Wauwatosa. Richard got out, but so did someone else, a woman I recognized immediately. It was Margaret Pemberton, his wife, and she wasn't angry. She wasn't surprised. She was smiling. I watched in amazement as all 3 of them, Richard, Margaret, and Becca, went into that house together. They looked like old friends. Hell, they looked like family. That night, I did something that probably wasn't legal and definitely wasn't smart. I broke into that house in Wauwatosa. What I found there changed everything I thought I knew about the whole situation. The house was set up like an office, but not for any business I recognized. There were files everywhere, photographs, documents, and what looked like surveillance equipment. And in the center of it all was a desk with a nameplate that read, Morrison Investigations. Becca Morrison wasn't a waitress who moonlighted as an escort. She was a private investigator. I spent the next hour going through those files, and the picture that emerged was incredible. Richard Pemberton wasn't Becca's client. He was her partner, and Margaret wasn't a wronged wife. She was the mastermind behind the whole operation. See, Margaret Pemberton had suspected for years that Richard was cheating on her with various women around Milwaukee, but instead of divorcing him and losing half of everything, she'd come up with a different plan. She hired Becca to seduce Richard, to document his infidelity, and to gather evidence that would give her the upper hand in any divorce proceedings. But what Margaret hadn't counted on was that Richard and Becca would figure out what was really going on. Instead of playing their assigned roles, they joined forces. They were working together to document Margaret's attempts to entrap Richard, building their own case for when the inevitable divorce came. And me, I was what they call in the business an unwitting asset. My relationship with Becca provided her with perfect cover for her meetings with Richard. Who would suspect a waitress dating a railroad worker of being involved in high society marital espionage? But the biggest twist of all was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up to find Becca sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading my newspaper like nothing had happened. "Hello, Harry," she said calmly. "I've been waiting for you to finish playing detective." My blood ran cold. How did I know you were following us?" "Harry, I'm a professional investigator. You're a sweet man, but you're about as subtle as a freight train. I spotted you on day one." She poured me a cup of coffee and gestured for me to sit down. "We need to talk." What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Becca told me everything, about Margaret hiring her, about discovering Richard's counter-investigation, about the three of them working together to untangle the mess they'd created. "But what about us?" I asked. "What about our relationship?" Becca was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, her eyes were different. Softer, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen them. "That's the thing, Harry," she said. "It started as part of my cover, but somewhere along the way it became real. I fell in love with you. Really, genuinely in love. And that scared me more than any dangerous husband or complicated case ever could." She reached across the table and took my hand. I've been living lies for so long that I'd forgotten what truth felt like. But with you, I remembered. You made me want to be the person you thought I was. The simple waitress who worked at Murphy's and dreamed of a little house with a white picket fence. I didn't know what to believe anymore. "So, what happens now?" Becca smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it looked completely genuine. "Now I have a proposal for you. Richard and Margaret are getting divorced. Amicably, as it turns out. They've both decided they're better as business partners than spouses. They want to start a legitimate investigation agency, and they've offered me a partnership." She squeezed my hand. "I could keep working cases, but no more lies, no more deception. Just honest investigative work, missing persons, insurance fraud, corporate espionage. Clean cases for clean money." "And us?" That's up to you, Harry. I know I've lied to you, and I know I've hurt you, but if you're willing to forgive me, if you're willing to start over with the truth this time, then I'd like to try again. Really try. With no games, no hidden agendas, just you and me figuring out what we could be together." I looked at this woman who'd turned my world upside down, who'd lied to me and broken my heart, and somehow made me love her even more in the process. I thought about the engagement ring still hidden in my sock drawer, about all the dreams I'd built around a woman who didn't really exist. But then I looked closer, and I saw something I'd missed before. Underneath all the lies and deception and complicated schemes, there was something real, something worth fighting for. "One condition," I said. She raised an eyebrow. What's that? No more secrets, ever. I don't care how bad the truth is, I want to hear it. We're partners now, in everything, or we're nothing at all. Becca smiled, and I knew I'd made the right choice. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Richard and Margaret were there. They'd become unlikely friends and eventually business partners in what became one of Milwaukee's most successful private investigation firms. Becca kept her word about the honesty, and over the next 38 years, she never lied to me again. Not once. She passed away 3 years ago, cancer, and I miss her every single day. But I've never regretted taking that chance on her. Never regretted choosing to believe in the woman she wanted to be, rather than the woman she'd been forced to become. The funny thing is, we never did get that little house with the white picket fence. We got something better, a life full of adventures, of cases solved and mysteries unraveled, of truth found in the most unlikely places. Becca became one of the most respected investigators in the state, and I eventually left the railroad to work with her full-time. We solved murders, found missing children, reunited families, and brought closure to people who thought they'd never find answers. It was a good life, a meaningful life, and we built it on a foundation of honesty that grew stronger every year. But you know what the real twist in this story is? The thing that still amazes me after all these years? That night when I found Becca in my apartment, the morning she told me the whole truth, she had one more confession to make. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box, the same box I'd hidden in my sock drawer, containing the engagement ring I'd bought from Mr. Goldman. "I've had this for 2 weeks," she said, with tears in her eyes. "Richard helped me get it from your apartment. I was going to give it back to you with an explanation, but then I realized something. I didn't want to give it back. I wanted you to give it to me properly when you were ready, when we were both ready to start over with the truth." I took that ring and got down on one knee right there in my kitchen, coffee getting cold on the table, the morning light streaming through the windows, and I asked Rebecca Catherine Morrison to marry me for real this time, with no lies between us, no games, no secrets. She said yes, of course, and that yes led to 38 years of the most honest, complicated, beautiful marriage you could imagine. So there you have it, young one, my story of love and betrayal and unexpected truth. The moral, if there is one, is this. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the people who have the most to teach us. Sometimes the biggest lies hide the most important truths. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, love gives you a second chance to get it right. Now, what you say, we have some of that pie Mrs. Henderson brought over. All this talking has made me hungry, and stories like this one deserve a proper ending, as something sweet to wash away the bitter taste of old mistakes and help you remember that life, even when it's complicated, can still turn out just fine.